Zacchaeus, I think Zacchaeus, although this story is very short and clipped, and as I've said before, there's a lot of filling in that needs to be done. And we don't know anything about Zacchaeus. This is the only reference to him in the whole Bible. Zacchaeus must be at some kind of a turning point. There must be something going on in his life that makes him think he's got to see this Jesus. He's got to talk to him, or he's got to experience something from this Jesus passing by. It's like going to see the Red Sox celebration, you know. Some very bad parents let their children off of school to go downtown to Boston to see this celebration, which, quite frankly, I would like to have gone too. But you know, you want to see something. You've followed this team through the year. These guys are wonderful ball players. They had a great year. Looks like they're going to be a dynasty for years to come. Unless Alex Rodriguez goes to the Cubs, but I didn't want to bring that up. At any rate, whatever the story is, we want to see them because there's something that happens. This is something, a game that many of us love. Some of you are probably sick of it by this time, but so we want to see them. And to think that Zacchaeus did this with Jesus is kind of funny. And we wish, okay, why did he do it? What's the big deal about this guy going to see him? Something must have been happening in his life. And it's interesting that he is warmly greeted by Jesus. And we don't understand why. Why does Jesus stop and look up and say to Zacchaeus, I have to spend the evening with you. I have to stay overnight with you. I've got things to talk about with you. And of course, the story quickly moves on. And we quickly see this change after the grumbling by the people who couldn't understand why Jesus wanted to stay with this rich tax collector sinner. But this is symbolic of God's grace. Comes out of the blue. It's not something that could be expected or something we can warm up for or something we can even prepare to receive. I think it's probably more like when Earl sits down to the piano and starts to play, he doesn't know what's going to happen. And we don't either. But God's grace just moves in these very odd ways. And if you and I are people who don't want to live with any mystery in our life, if we like to know all the answers, if we want to be an expert on life, we miss out because there's no explaining some of this stuff. Now, Zacchaeus is rich. And people who are rich in this way have a terrible tendency to be arrogant about what they know. Arrogant in the way that they act. And arrogant in the fact that they think they know, or their process of thinking is really above everyone else. Look at how successful they've been. And when life is going really well, and I don't think any of us are wealthy in the sense that Zacchaeus is talked about here, but when things are going really well and we're flush with money and nobody's sick and everything's going fine, what creeps into our idea, into our mind is the idea that we don't really need anything else, do we? And we don't really need anyone else. We're doing pretty well on our own. It's a deadly thought. In Eastern religions, they teach about what they call the beginner's mind. It's a very important concept. Jesus teaches about it too, but it's not encapsulated in a doctrine of religion the way it is with Jesus. In the beginner's mind, Eastern folks say, are many possibilities in the beginner's mind. In the expert's mind, there are few possibilities. There's a few chances for newness to break in. And of course, in any good story, you have a conflict going on. And in this story about Zacchaeus, we have the grumblers. The grumblers in the gospel story are the experts. They are expert about what Jesus should think and do. Doesn't he know he's going to sit at dinner with this sinner? Doesn't he understand that he shouldn't, as a religious person, as someone who represents God, have anything to do with this? One of the churches in our own area that's experiencing some significant growth often holds services in a bar room and attracts people to worship, or at least to discussion, that we would say, well, that really isn't the way you should do that, is it? In a bar room, lots of signs around about various things to drink. Of course, we all know the problems of alcoholism, and that doesn't seem to be a good idea. And then the people from the bar room show up in the sanctuary on Sunday morning, and we say, well, that's okay. But would they have ever come to the sanctuary without being met by Jesus in the bar room? See, that's the question. That's the idea that breaks in upon us and causes us to wonder how expert we are. And as far as grumblers, as far as I can tell, grumblers are the greatest and most populous group of people in the entire world. And they're everywhere, and you know that. We participate ourselves every once in a while, but we also know that when we look around, boy, there are a lot of grumblers. If they were wearing bowling shirts, everybody would be dressed in the same color, you know? And Jesus rejects them. Once again, he surprises people with acceptance and forgiveness in places they don't really want him to do that, quite frankly. Leave Zacchaeus alone. The guy is not a good guy. Just let him rot, so to speak. And then comes a surprising idea. Zacchaeus, come down from that tree. You and I have to spend some time together. We love the thought if Jesus says that to us. If the Holy Spirit comes into our lives, and yet there are times when we have done things that we believe screen out God. And maybe Zacchaeus thought that too. I'll get a look at him, but that would be lucky just to have that. And then God's love breaks in and something miraculous, marvelous happens. I imagine this old man John in Georgia in his drinking days, he had plenty of folks advising others to stay away from him. If you want to encourage grumbling, behave badly. A lot of people will grumble about you. And the grumblers wanted people to stay away from him. Perhaps even his own loved ones were grumblers, with good reason. The grumblers' minds, however, lack any openness to the possibility of redemption. This guy is a rotten guy. This guy is a drinker. This guy, is it possible he could be something else? Is it possible his life could change so radically that we would want to be with him? Is it possible that at some point a bunch of people would sit around the table waiting to hear John speak, to tell his story? And that story from this old farmer, grizzled and worn out in some respect, and at one time a heavy drinker, is it possible that his story would inspire other people to change their lives? Somebody that you loved, somebody that you knew could go into a meeting and this old John would have such a powerful effect on them that they would want to change their lives. See, any addiction is like this. Addiction closes up our minds and our ideas are screened out. And quite frankly, addictions can screen out God if they're heavy enough and if we believe that they're stronger than anything else. One thing to break an addiction that must happen is that the person must believe somehow God will redeem me. Somehow there's enough worth in me, there's enough value, there's enough love coming from God that even I can change and become somebody else. And the truth is, and one of the things we learn in church development is that church communities become addicted. As a community, it can be a church community, it can be a lot of other organizations, but they become addicted. especially when we romanticize the past.